Brooke, can you go to your system landscape?
Yeah.
So I have a few boxes here that I mentioned MDM and legacy CRM that is not connected with Salesforce at all. Are you missing any connections? Do you want to explain these?
Yeah, I didn't draw all the data migration or ETL connections. So I spoke to the data migration strategy without drawing it in here because it's a one-time approach, and also integrations weren't in scope. But let me know if you'd like me to recap those connections.
Just a very high level and brief on what the data, how the data will fly or flow from or to Salesforce and these two systems.
Okay, so prior to go live, we'll have a one-time load from the ERP and CRM system to the MDM. After the data has been deduplicated and matched, it will be loaded one time to a staging database, not on the landscape at all. And from there, that data will be loaded to Salesforce. And then long term, there will be bi-directional integrations between Salesforce and the MDM, and between the MDM and the ERP system to keep customer and asset data in sync.
So if I brief that on the diagram, it's two-way between MDM Salesforce and one-way between legacy CRM to Salesforce.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We'll come back to MDM later. I think Jitendra, I have a few questions.
Yeah.
Can you go to data model, please?
Yeah.
Did you use location custom object here? Did you assess any other standard options and disqualified them? If yes, what are these and why you disqualify?
Yeah. So two options that I assessed. One was the standard location object. However, it's typically used for inventory management. We have no inventory management requirements here. And I assessed using the account object with a different record type. However, chose not to do that to improve the volumes assigned to each table.
Okay, I think I understand the account option, but I didn't get the location standard. You say it is used for inventory and we're gonna have inventory requirements. Can you explain a little bit what does it mean? Why the object is not fit?
Yeah, so if I needed to track like the amount of a particular product stocked at a particular warehouse, for example, I'd use the standard location object. But this is representing the customer site, just a property that they own. So you could just as easily name it property underscore underscore C. It's many to one to account instead of many to many.
Okay, sorry. What you modeling in location again? Is it only the site or also the property?
It is the customer's property and is many to one to account.
Okay, let's zoom in a little bit here. There were a few mentions of requirements and the relationship between the context and the properties, and in different situations for business and others. It's many to many. How this is modeled in your data model now?
Okay, so it's missing. So there should be an account contact relation, or sorry, a custom junction object, contact location, that will be master detailed to both contact and location.
Okay, so custom object you introduce between location and contact.
Yeah, to create a junction object to create a many to many.
Will this have any implications on exposing location or property data in Portal at all?
Yes. It would. It would have implications. We can't use sharing sets to traverse a many to many object.
Okay.
However, I did not evaluate the sharing requirements. However, that could be potentially resolved by making location master detailed to account.
Okay, if we focus on the data model and you mentioned that there may be implications. We do not need to zoom in on the security side of it, but how to make your data model support security requirements. Would you keep what you mentioned now, or you do any changes?
It depends.
What I mean by you mentioned custom location, lookup relation, and junction custom object between contact and location.
Yeah, so if the security requires that contacts be able to access some locations at an account and not others, then we will need to make locations another account record type and use account contact relation because it's supported by sharing sets.
Okay, with focus on data model, which solution you keep, which solution you skip? What's your final solution?
With sharing out of scope, I would use a custom junction. I would continue with this data model and use the custom junction object.
Okay, thank you. Another question on payment. You did store payment methods in custom object and payments itself in a big object. Is this objects you develop or something you use from packages?
This is an object that I develop. I didn't evaluate whether or not a app exchange package is needed.
In that case, what do you actually store in payment method?
Payment method will contain only tokenized payment information returned by a credit card or bank.
Can you explain what does it mean tokenized? And is there any other version of the account or the credit card bank account stored anywhere else?
Yeah, I can explain how that works. So most credit card companies provide HTML code that you can use to process payments through them. It can be utilized in the Lightning Web Component. When you successfully perform a payment or a test payment referred to as an authorization hold, then tokenized payment information is returned. And you can use that to process future charges without storing the actual credit card in your system and being subject to certain challenges related to PCI compliance. So the full payment information is stored uh, with the credit card company, but you only need essentially a token that they return to process charges in the future.
And will you generate that token, or you say it? Or the credit card company will give you token?
Credit card company gives you the token.
Okay, which credit card company integrated with before that give you that?
Um, Visa, MasterCard, they also all the common credit card companies support it.
Token for the payment method, not token for the transaction.
Right. The transaction is
Okay.
then stored in a big object.
Okay. Thank you. Over to you, Varuna or Jitendra for questions.
I can go. I have a follow-up question on the payment itself.
Mm.
So, Brooke, you mentioned that for the payment, you will have a JavaScript, something on the LWC from where you will initiate a payment.
Mhm.
So that would work for all the manual payment, right? If someone is manually or on the system trying to pay, how it would happen for the recurring payment?
Yeah. So I considered the selection of an app exchange app to be out of scope. So I instead considered the data structure required to meet the business requirements, not the solution. But if I need to solve for requirements like that, I would likely select an app exchange app that supports recurring payments.
Okay. Brooke, can you go on the data migration slide?
Yeah.
So in data migration, can you explain the MDM? Are you using MDM only during the data migration, or MDM is in the finals after data migration as well?
Yeah. So for the data migration, we are using the MDM, but we'll also use it long term. And that is referred to as a coexistence style, where changes can be made in the source system, which is Salesforce, or in the MDM itself, and then they're synced back and forth via ETL.
Okay, what is the reason for go for MDM? Is there any requirement, anything you saw that you
Yeah.
are?
MDM is great for resolving high volumes of duplicates and also for matching data entities between different systems using fuzzy matching algorithms like a combination of address, name. And it can also figure out like ST and street are the same. So because the data migration requirements mention they have 80 million customer records spread across the CRMs, but there are only 6 million unique records, and they need to be matched to duplicates in the ERP system, an MDM is the type of tool that would allow us to match them based on the address, the name of the company, and other attributes like the phone, etc.
Okay. And after that, let's say the data migration is done and everything is done, how would you keep using the MDM?
So if a customer makes changes, if a change is made to a customer or an asset in Salesforce, a regular ETL job will sync that to the MDM system. And then if a change is made in the MDM, then similarly, another ETL job will sync back to Salesforce.
Okay. Now in your data migration slide, you already have MDM, you already have an ETL also. If you go in that slide, why do we need a stored procedures here if you already have an ETL?
So we don't need them. However, they perform very quickly. When we have tables that have 6.7 or even 10 million rows, data doesn't have to be extracted and then loaded back into the database. So it will allow us to achieve a tighter data migration window.
But that would be possible by ETL as well, isn't
it? It just will take a little bit longer to process.
Okay.
I have a question. Brock, can you go to the data model?
Yeah.
Yeah, on the LDV fund, you said you'll be archiving some records. If they, for example, if they are closed in Q1, you'll be archiving them in Q2.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So my question is, how did you pick this Q1 CORD approach? So, for example, if the closure happens on the last day of Q1, are you still gonna close it on the day 1 of Q2?
At the end of Q2. So the reason for choosing this quarter-based approach is so that at any given point in time, you can always report on the past quarter and the current fiscal quarter and compare the performance of the two. And then if someone at a management level needs to look at year over year or even further back than that, they can do that in an analytics tool such as Tableau CRM.
So when you're archiving these records, if the user is logged into the community, are you gonna take the access out when these accounts are archived?
Yeah, so we're only archiving them if they haven't had an active contract for a year. With respect to the accounts and contacts and users.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, it's assumed they don't need access to the system unless they decide to sign they contact and decide to sign another contract.
So if they try to re-log in to the community, what's the user experience?
If they try to log into the community, they'll get access denied. And they will be redirected to a form to request reactivating their account. It will be a public Experience Cloud site.
Okay, so you don't think it's good to inform them while they are inactivating? Okay, you're not done any business with us. Okay,
yeah.
Gonna...
So we can, to improve the user experience, we can build a process to warn them a month prior to their account being deactivated that if they don't sign a new contract, their account will be deactivated.
All right, so you're gonna go with that approach. All right, okay.
Quick follow-up on that. When it comes to archiving, do you mind explaining the archiving process? How would you archive data, not only the frequency?
Yeah. So I'll give I gave two different approaches for two different types of objects. So for customers, contracts, assets, locations, and payment methods, when the customer is inactive, that means they have not had an active contract for 1 year or longer, then that account their contact records and any associated records that I just mentioned will get inserted into the data warehouse as part of a weekly ETL job that runs. Upon acknowledgement of successful insert in the data warehouse, the ETL tool will then delete the record from Salesforce. For user records, they can only be inactivated. For records like cases, where I discussed that they will be archived at the end of Q2 if they were closed sometime in Q1, then the process is instead, we have a job that runs at the end of each quarter that looks out for records that have a close date stamped sometime 3 months or more ago. That process will then insert the record into the data warehouse and upon successful acknowledgement, delete it from Salesforce.
So Brock, for a closed case, if the customer calls the call center and asks, okay, about a update about the closed case, how would the user know whether the case has been archived or is what is the user experience?
Yeah. So in terms of the user experience, when a case has been archived to the data warehouse, you will not see it on their account record. However, we did select a data warehouse I chose to select a data warehouse with OData capabilities so that if there is a requirement to see archived cases, we can purchase Salesforce Connect and expose those cases via an external object and show them as a related list on the account record.
So you want the
user
to, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Arun. Sorry, I thought
I was saying, yeah, so if the user, from a user point of view, you want them to first click on the cases, and if they don't find it, click on another tab where data is exposed through OData. So you want the user to...
They'd be two different related lists. And this is only for cases that were closed, at least 3 months ago. Like they got successful resolution at least 3 months ago.
So you'll have two tabs. So user is going to first click on the first one where it's open cases. And if it's closed for more than 3 months, you're there to click on another tab.
They're not tabs. They're like related lists on the account record. They'll see two related lists, one on top of the other. And then if they search, it will also search both. They'll just show up as, two separate tabs in the search results screen.
Okay. Good, Mo.
Just had one follow-up on this. Brooke, you mentioned there is a job that will run to pick up the cases or any other records. Is that job inside Salesforce or outside?
It's inside the ETL tool. There'll be a scheduled process in the ETL tool.
And how will it pick up the data from Salesforce?
It will perform a remote call into Salesforce and use the bulk API to query the object in question.
And how about the deletion? How it works in that flow?
That is another remote call-in using the bulk API to delete the object, to delete the record.
Okay. Is there any dependency between the two? Like if deletion is failed, what will happen?
Yeah. So to discuss that in detail, we call into Salesforce, query the records that are ready to be archived. Take those records, the ETL tool will then insert them into the data warehouse. If there's a problem with the insert, they'll be added to an error queue for later reprocessing. However, if insert is acknowledged successfully, then we'll perform a remote call in to delete the record from Salesforce. If there's a problem with deleting the record after it was successfully inserted in the data warehouse, the record will be added to a different error queue in the ETL tool for reprocessing.
Excellent. And what type of deletion is this?
This is a hard delete because we have already received acknowledgement that the record was backed up in the data warehouse.
Okay, thank you.
I have another question. Brock, can you go to your risk slide?
Yeah.
Yeah, the first risk you mentioned about that 6 months release cycle from ERP. And on a solution, you mentioned about some integrations, for example, looking at invoices and so on through ERP. So how would you test those integrations, during your dev cycle or development cycle of Salesforce? You are going to wait for 6 months, or what if the UAT has to be done
Right.
much earlier?
Okay. So when I spoke to this environments and CI process, from a QA perspective, I focused on Salesforce development, but we're going to have another version control repository for the integrations that mirrors this branching strategy. So there'll be a develop branch in the integration repo, and integrations will be promoted to the same environments based on the branch. So throughout the build phase, the integration developers are also promoting integrations and testing them in our smoke testing environment, in our QA environment. SIT is the first time that the integration and the Salesforce application are tested together end to end. That's system integration testing that occurs at the end of the build phase in our full copy sandbox.
Yeah, so the question, Brock, is without waiting for 6 months, and if the ERP is not ready with their integration, say for a payment integration, can you test that before waiting for them to be ready?
Yeah, they can't change their production release schedule. I saw no indication that they couldn't be developing in a hybrid agile fashion.
Yeah. So what kind of testing tools or ways you can have to test those integrations without really
Yeah, so
hitting them?
you're gonna have a technical QA tester that can use tools like Postman and SOAP UI to test APIs, and also test environments for the ERP that will be updated sooner than the production release.
Yeah. Can you? I mean, is there a way on, like, for example, on ESBs? Are there any features you can use to do tests without really hitting the real APIs? Like,
Yeah, we can create mock APIs and test against those instead of truly connecting to the environment. That would typically be done when connecting to our dev integration sandbox where smoke testing occurs. If they're truly not able to release frequently to their test environments, then we might have to do that when connecting to our QA environment as well.
all right, thank you.
So, Brock, on the same slide, what kinds of testing you are doing in the DevPro sandbox, DevPro 2 sandbox?
Yeah, so DevPro 1 is where the developer smoke tests their own work. So this is a place where deployments happen multiple times a day every time a PR is completed. And then that's smoke testing is developers making sure that their changes work when they're integrated with the changes of other developers. So after the pull request is completed and any merge conflicts are resolved, they have to test their own work in the DevPro 1 sandbox. In the DevPro 2 sandbox, at the start of each day, there's a single deployment of all the changes that were made the prior day so that QA testers have a more stable environment to test in.
And what is that RGC? What is the full form of that term? Regression, do you mean? QA/?
A QA and regression.
Okay. So why did you choose a DevPro sandbox for the regression testing? What is the decision behind that?
Yeah. So in Unlimited Edition, which most enterprise clients like this purchase, there is a limit of one full copy sandbox and one partial sandbox. So if we're choosing to reserve our partial sandbox for critical bug fixes, since we're going to have multiple releases over time, so that we have realistic copies of production data to test critical production bugs. And we're reserving our full copy sandbox because it's needed to perform SIT and incorporate our full data migration, and also to provide a full load of data for user acceptance testing. The highest environment that remains to us is Dev Pro Sandbox. We'll have 5 of those.
So do you think the DevPro sandbox would be enough for the QA and the regression testing?
I do, yes. Typically, mock data will be staged, and that's what we're using Salesforce Data Move utility for. We'll have testers working with developers to determine the data that they need to build into our deployment scripts to enable QA and regression.
And what is the storage capacity of DevPro?
I believe it's 5 gigabytes of data. So just a sample of data, not a full data set.
Okay. And 5 gigabytes of data, how many records it can be there?
Yeah, so I'm just gonna quickly calculate that. Equals 5 times 1024 divided by 2. That's 2,560 records. So it's a very limited data set, but easily enough for 50 to 100 records of each object, which will be sufficient for passing our user acceptance criteria.
Okay.
Let's ask this question the other way. Usually, regression has also some test cases related to impacts by data changes based on user behavior. So the question has two parts. First one, how will you prepare data in this org for regression? And second, how will you keep up to date with changes of data in production to make sure that you cover enough cases in regression in DevBro?
The purpose of this regression testing is to make sure that stories developed in, let's say, sprint 3 don't break stories that were developed in sprints 1 and 2.
But bro, yeah, DevPro is a 5 gigabytes. Okay, let's say the DevPro is a 1 gigabyte storage.
Mhm.
Do you still think that DevPro is the right sandbox for the regression testing?
No, in that case, then I would just deploy to our full sandbox for QA and regression testing. But we would need to either purchase another full sandbox, or we wouldn't be able to work release 2 in parallel with sit in UAT for release 1. So it limits your ability to work in parallel, or requires you to pay a I believe 40% premium to purchase a second full copy sandbox.
Okay. What is in the tool section? You have sfdmu. Can you explain why do we need that?
Yeah, sfdmu is just a plugin for SFDX. It's used for loading data, and so this is useful for staging just mock data for QA testing.
Okay. And what is the difference between CI and CD? I see you have a CI and CD both.
Continuous integration and continuous deployment. I'm just saying quality testing versus actually releasing the functionality.
So what exactly is the difference between both?
When a pull request is submitted, we test to make sure that deployment and unit tests pass in a Scratch org. When a pull request is approved and a commit is recorded, we actually deploy to the target org listed here.
So I'm sorry, Brooke, I'm still didn't get that. What is the difference between CI and CD?
Continuous integration is constantly testing code for quality and ensuring that it is deployable, and continuous deployment is releasing functionality as soon as it's ready and complete. So it's actually deploying functionality rather than testing it.
Okay. Another thing you mentioned in the development lifecycle is you are going to use the unlock package. Any particular reason that why you are going with unlock packages compared to direct metadata deployment?
Yeah, so it's a combination of unlocked packages and unpackaged metadata, because not all metadata types are supported by unlocked packages. But the advantage of using unlocked packages where we can is that you can have risk-free rollbacks. So if you install version 1.1 and there is a problem in production, you can roll back to version 1.0. And if you're just deploying using the metadata API, you'd actually have to calculate the difference and deploy the old version of the metadata and then do a diff and then perform destructive changes where necessary to delete things. So unlocked packages handle rollbacks very smoothly. And then they also handle deprecating metadata very smoothly. If you no longer need a field, you just delete it from version 1.1, and installing the package will result in that field being deleted.
Okay. Another question I have is you mentioned the development methodology as a hybrid, agile plus waterfall. What is the reason we need a waterfall here?
Yeah. So the aspects of Waterfall that we're taking are having a discovery and a design phase as well as a big test phase, rather than incorporating all of that into sprints. It is to reduce our risk to ensure that we have a cohesive solution vision and to align our release schedules with the dates where the ERP tool can also have a production release. So
Can't we
was
do
it
that
clear?
during the PI planning in agile?
Sorry, what was that?
So instead of the waterfall, the agreement on the release schedule and everything, can't we do during the PI planning if we go pure agile?
If you're referring to SAFe, then yes, that is an alternative. But I think this will minimize their risk because in the real world, this system landscape has to be developed. This data model has to be developed up front to ensure that a cohesive solution is delivered, and that would happen during the design phase. Whereas even with SAFe, that would happen in a design spike, and it could potentially lead to changes in the design that result in either a fragmented solution or possibly rolling back changes that were already developed.
Okay. Another push I have is there is a requirement that there is a compliance that call needs to be attended within a 10 minute, and your solution is a CTI. How the CTI would help achieving the 10-minute deadline?
So CTI is just part of it. CTI allows the call to come into Salesforce as a case, and then case escalation rules enable us to send warnings when we get close to the 10-minute mark and to escalate to a manager when we reach the 10-minute mark.
So you are saying that if someone is not picking up the call, still you would create a case even if the call is in a queue status? How would that work? I am trying to understand the whole
Yeah, so
experience.
CTI apps usually integrate with omnichannel, and so someone calls in, a case is created, it's assigned to a queue, and then omnichannel finds someone who is available, and they have to accept the case, and when they do so, the console pops, and they're actually like their headset is connected to the phone call.
Okay. More, Aruna?
We had a question on the data model, Brock, about the short-term LDV strategies you mentioned about skinny tables. Any specific table that you are focusing on for the solution?
Yeah, for skinny table. So based on our reporting requirements. So for example, they want to focus on, oh, sorry, I ran out of time. Let me know if you want me to finish answering that.
Yeah, I can finish now, sorry.
Okay, so for example, there is the SVP of service wants to see a report, the number of complaints received and broken down by country and region. This will improve the performance of a report on cases. We can add a skinny table to the case object. And what it does is creates a single table with both standard and custom fields that improves report performance. It will also only include the columns that are needed for reports. That further improves report performance.
Okay, so how does it improve the reading the main table versus the skinny table? How is the performance increased?
Salesforce no longer has to perform a join between the table that they use to track standard fields and the table that they use to track custom fields, and it's also a narrower table, which results in improved query performance.
All right, thank you.